Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Hillsborough Township Planning Board meeting of May 11th, 2023. Please join me in a salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There's no hiding. I know, but I don't know. Please be advised this meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, otherwise known as the Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2023 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, Township Clerk, on the Township's website, and available here in the Hillsborough Township Municipal Complex. In addition, application documents have been made available on the Township's Civic Clerk website, and complete applications are available in the Planning and Zoning Departments for inspections in accordance with the public meeting notice. With that, may I have roll call of Planning Board members and also Board and Township professionals, please.
Vice Chair Julie, Secretary Hustag, Mr. Pease, and Mr. Radowitz, and currently Mr. Delfor are absent. Mr. Wagner? Here. Mr. Scobo? Here. Mrs. Smith?
Here.
Committeeman Chigarelli?
Here.
Mayor Lapine?
Here.
Chair Sarachi?
Here.
Mr. Boyce?
Here.
Bernstein?
Here.
Mayhew?
Here.
And me and the videographer are here.
Okay, excellent. Welcome, everyone. Just real quick, I know we're out of meeting agendas, but trust me, there's not much on there. I think we all know what we're here for tonight. We do not have considerations of meeting minutes, resolutions, there's no planning board business, and no consideration of ordinances. So next up on the agenda is business from the floor for items that are not on this evening's agenda. You may come up. It's a 5-minute limit, and no commentary directly or indirectly involving warehouses. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to this evening's applications, public hearings. First one, I think this is more of a administrative action with regards to Homestead 279 LLC, file number 22-PB-05-S/MSPV with the time of decision of June 30th of this year. I believe the applicant is going to is looking for an adjournment to a future date.
Yes.
Counselor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Sarachi. Mike Ogrodnik on behalf of the applicant. We're just here tonight requesting an adjournment of this application. The site engineer and representatives from the applicant are trying to redesign some of the elements of the site plan to address some of the concerns raised by the board professionals, and the objectors. So that's the reason for our adjournment. We're working on some alterations to the plan.
Okay. Mr. Coyce, we have some dates.
Yes, we have June 8th, 2023, holding for it.
Ask him, not me.
That works. Yep.
Does it work? And we don't have any other conflicts on that? Yeah.
Ms. Torriello, for the purpose of the record.
Yes, good evening. Joseph Torriello for resident objector Sandra Ainella. June 8th is fine.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the date is actually on the calendar for possible use anyway, so it's obviously Mr. Ogrodnik is aware that he has to have all documents in at least 10 days in advance for review, and also to the objector for the same issues. And I remind everybody that there is a holiday in that time frame.
The only thing I would like to ask is, at the last meeting, there was a robust discussion regarding standing, and I don't know if that issue has been resolved and what the board's thought was in terms of how.
Not yet. I will look at it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, what at this point is a motion to continue this application without further notice until Thursday, June 8th at 7 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter may be heard.
Okay. So may I have a motion? Okay, Mr. Scobo made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mayor made the second. Roll call, please.
What's going on, buddy? What are you doing?
Yes.
Yes.
Abstain.
Mayor Lapine?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion carries. We'll see you guys on the 8th, June 8th. Okay. And objectors for the next application, feel free to take the table. So next up on the agenda is Western Road LLC, file number 22-BB-03, MSPV, with a time of decision of June 30th of this year. This application is continuing from last week's meeting on May 4th without further notice. And I believe we're in the midst of public questioning of the witness on his testimony on operations. So, Mr. Bernstein, do I need to reopen the public?
Reopen the public. Reopen the public, B, re-swear in the applicant representative, just for the record, and go from there.
Okay. First, we'll swear you in.
Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? For the record, using mic, if you can say anything, please.
Ahad Arif, A-R-I-F.
Okay. And nothing has changed in your standing since last week as far as the operations of the
No.
business? Okay. Thank you. Now, may I have a motion to open it back up to public?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, if there's anyone in the audience that would like to question the witness on his testimony from last week, please come to the mic.
Who are not represented by objectors' counsel.
Right, and who's not represented by objectors' counsel. State your name and address for the record.
Bob Harris, is it on?
It went through with Eric. Did Ron sign something?
Yes.
Yeah, while David is taking care of things,
Check, check.
before anyone comments, we do
Check,
have
check.
2 certifications by absent board member, examination of record eligibility to vote. I have one from Mr. Scobo regarding the May 4th hearing. I have one from Mr. Ciccarelli regarding the March 23rd. They are both eligible to participate in this evening's festivities.
Thank you.
Bob Harris, 13 Hunt Club Road. I am not represented by the objectors. The problem with the Amazon warehouse in Robbinsville, New Jersey, was the trucks arrived in the area before the warehouse was open.
Okay. I'm sorry, it's a question of the witness.
I've got a question.
Well, no, yes, now, you will question, no general statements.
Okay.
That gets saved either for the traffic engineer that I believe will be here tonight, or someone
Okay.
else appropriate, or at the end of the of the applicant presenting their case.
All right. Can you assure the residents of Hearthstone that tractor trailers are not going to be a problem after hours?
I believe, yes, I don't think they will pose any issues to the neighboring, and I think traffic can attest to that further.
Okay. You stated that ports are closed after hours. I have it on good authority that the Maersk operation at Port Elizabeth loads containers onto trucks 24 hours a day.
Right, but the trucking companies we use, we don't do them after hours. It's just not beneficial for us. It's extremely expensive.
All right. I know it seems like we beat to death the number of employees, but I still need some clarification. You stated at one point that you had 60 to 65 employees in Florida. These are third-party logistics employees, not yours. At 2 hours and 21 minutes in the video that I reviewed, you said there were 55 to 65 employees. 45 are full-time. When you were asked how many people at work at one time, you said some of the 55 staff are administrative, 45 plus are there at the same time. when asked about the makeup of the current staff, you said you have people in marketing, ops, customer service, management, and content creation. Are those 3PL employees?
No, those are not 3PL employees.
Okay. You stated that you were going to use about 2,500 pallets by my calculation. That would take about 33,000 square feet. That would be about a fourth of the warehouse. In Florida, that would mean, if you did the math, that would mean you'd only be using presumably a fourth of the 3PL employees. That would be about 15 people. Does that sound right?
That's the current operations, but again, I just have to, I can't guarantee the numbers. I don't know the numbers that you're stating, but we are a growing company. We've grown pretty rapidly. We continue to grow. We're also expanding internationally and wholesale. Right now, we only do online.
Okay. So I understand you can't know how many people are going to be here 2 years from now, but the following exchange occurred last week. Your office is currently in Franklin Park, and how many employees do you have there now? Everybody right now is remote. Well, how many remote employees do you have approximately? About 55 that I mentioned. Warehouse employees can't be remote. I'm confused about the administrative people and the people who are packing and unpacking things in the warehouse. It seems 55 keeps coming up, but it can't all be the same 55.
I think there's a confusion with the number of employees that are part of the 3PL, which are not under my company, and the number of employees that I have. There's a confusion that's happening there.
So who are the employees that you have, and are any of them in Florida?
We don't have any employees in Florida. Everybody in Florida is part of our 3PL service. We don't have any employees
All right.
there.
The architectural plan shows a 5,300 square foot office in the new facility. Does that include a break room for staff?
I would defer to architecture on that.
Okay. Reason I'm asking is I wonder if you are planning on how many people go to lunch. And that's a operational question that drives traffic, because every person that goes to lunch is another 2 cars a day in and out of the facility.
Again, I would probably defer to traffic on that.
All right. I have to modify this next question because it goes on for a while. Will you provide restroom facilities for truck drivers?
I don't know.
It's okay to say you don't know.
I don't know.
All right. That has been a problem in areas with large warehouses, with truck drivers behaving badly. You mentioned pallets several times last week. Will pallets be stored indoors or outdoors?
Everything will be stored indoors.
All right. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Good luck with your business. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witness or public?
Brian Tarantino, Fairfield Lane. Hi, good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
So, about operations, that's what we're here really to talk about. So, we're concerned about what you're going to store there. I mean, sheets and bedding doesn't sound too dangerous, but you're going to have a lot of other space. Do you have plans to store any wastes at the site? Waste materials, waste soil?
No.
Okay. And would you be willing to accept a condition of approval that says you won't store wastes at the facility?
That's a legal question.
Yeah.
Is it?
Sure is.
I mean, it's a question about the operation of the facility.
Just use the mic, Mr. Ogrodnik.
So, can you define waste?
Yeah, something that would be considered under the NJDEP regulations as a non-hazardous waste. You wouldn't be able to store hazardous waste at the facility without a special permit, but you would be able to store waste materials at the site.
I'm going to say my client answered the questions about the types of goods that his business intends to store on the facility.
Okay, but
No, we will not agree to a condition.
okay,
that
so
says
it's possible in the future that you would be storing wastes at the facility.
it's not anticipated at this time.
Right. Do you have a plan to store like compressed gases at the site?
Again, it's not anticipated at this time. We're a home sheets company, bed sheets, not even related to that.
Right, but as we pointed out, the lots of free space at the facility, and you're not just you're not just a tenant, you're also a co-owner. So it's possible that you could have another tenant who might be bringing in gas cylinders.
I do not anticipate storing any of that stuff in my company, for my company.
Okay. So I have like kind of a long list. We can shorten it. There's a lot of materials that would be dangerous and a real concern to residents who live nearby and even regional folks who live, in the regional area. The question I have is, would you be willing to have some limitation on the kinds of materials that you store at the facility to alleviate the concerns of the neighbors about storage of dangerous materials?
I'm definitely willing to work on that. I just can't say yes or no because I don't know like what those conditions or anything will be.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I do not see anyone else coming. Judy, come on. Susan.
Public's here.
You guys got to get in line so they could see.
You got beat. Too slow.
Oh, did you want to go? Okay. Hello, you've sprinted past me in the hall, so if this doesn't work out, you certainly have a business you could go in pretty fast. But good evening. I have some questions going. I have some questions.
Name and address,
I'm sorry.
please.
I should know. Judy Haas, Titus Court. I have some questions going back to the ownership of the property, and forgive me if I'm confused, but
Mike, please.
I'm speaking right into the mic.
You got to stay close to it.
What's that?
That's not one of the newer mics.
I don't think I could get any more closer, but okay. Excuse me. Mr. Guastella signed as the landowner on this property, and you're signing as the applicant. What is your current relationship with Mr. Guastella, and what is his role in this application?
I guess it's a legal question. They're contract purchasers.
Which means?
That if the approvals are granted, then they're going to purchase the property.
Okay, and when does that contract go back to?
I don't think that's relevant to a land use application. It's confidential. It's attorney-client privilege and doesn't have any bearing on the application.
Actually, it's a public document.
No, it's not.
Actually, it is.
A purchase and sale contract is not a public document.
The existence of the document goes back to February of 2021. It is registered in the clerk's office.
Okay.
Okay.
Then you can research
Now that I've
it.
informed you of that, can you tell me why Mr. Guastella signed as the landowner in December of 2021?
I don't know.
Are you the attorney for this?
Yes, I am, ma'am.
Okay, well, I'm concerned about standing because it seems like there are conflicting things out there. But,
Mr. Goswell is the record property owner.
okay,
So this is pretty common in land development where there's conditions imposed on a purchase and sale contract, contingencies related to agency and outside agency approvals.
okay, well, ultimately, it's not up to me to decide whether or not that's whatever. Going back into the ownership, are the other two owners of Weston LLC going to be testifying?
No.
Okay, so you're a 33% owner, and the other two 33% owners will not be testifying?
That's correct.
I thought I was talking to the owner? Okay.
That's correct.
So, okay. Okay, you had mentioned, I think it's been brought up before, that you're going to be there as a tenant, as Miracle Brands, but you're also going to own the building. And I would like to understand whether or not the people who own the building are also the entire tenant, or are you personally the tenant, or are other people part of the ownership of the tenant group?
I'm going to object to that. That's confidential.
Okay. Is that like pleading the fifth? I mean, seriously, why wouldn't you answer a question like that? Okay, don't answer. Mr. Sirachi at the last meeting asked if you personally were involved in other business ventures. You said yes, not in e-commerce, but they wouldn't wind up in this building. However, are you related to an Adnan Arif, either professionally or personally?
Yes.
Okay, well, I found out that Adnan Arif is the senior managing partner of Indus Developers. And he's also the president and CEO, well, Indus Developers being the owner of that nasty little rectangle of property, also known as Lot 7. He's also president and CEO of Cotton Valley Home Incorporated, located in Somerset, New Jersey, from November 2007 to the present, which is also a bedding and kitchen linens retailer with many big box clients, which you mentioned at the last meeting you would wish for your tenant Miracle Brands. And you, unless there's another person with your name, are also listed as a managing partner of Cotton Valley Home from November 2007 to the present. Could you please explain the relationship between the companies and the principals?
I'm going to object to the question as irrelevant.
Well,
and I'm going to instruct my client not to witness.
Understand why the size of this warehouse is necessary for a company that does not currently use this size down in Jacksonville. And
do you have a question?
Yeah, I asked my question. You're refusing to answer it on behalf of your client, who doesn't look like, I mean, all of this stuff is in the public record. So I'm just going to assume that it's true. Have it your way. Okay, there are, from what I understand, and I am not a warehouse expert, there are 3 definitions of the kinds of warehouses people could have. And this comes from ordinances that are in other towns where they actually define 3 kinds of warehouses. One is a break bulk, one is a fulfillment, and one is a last mile. From your description of having tractor trailers coming to yours with containers from the port and all of that, seems to me that that would be the most intense of the 3 kinds of warehouses. Would you agree with that?
I would just let either Traffic or Jim Scott answer that on behalf of me.
Well, it goes to, I mean, you've already said that that's what's going to be coming to your warehouse. So I would just like to say that I think a lot of people in Hillsborough feel that the warehouses that we're familiar with are those which are the smaller ones. And the size of this, I think, is what, and I'm not speaking, I am, Lord knows, not speaking for Hearthstone. But it seems to me that, first of all, Hillsborough as an entire town has 3% industrial use. It is largely a bedroom community. 85% of the parcels in town are residential properties. So I hope you understand why this comes as, you know, especially to a senior citizen development, you know, it comes as a bit of a hit. And the other types of warehouses, while, you know, they're not quite as intense as the others, might have been what the ordinance was anticipating when they allowed warehouse use across the street from a residential development of senior citizen housing. And I just want to throw that out there. And your warehouse in Florida, is also that break bulk facility?
They receive goods from overseas in containers, and then they break it down and they ship it out using UPS, FedEx, and DHL.
Okay, and between Jacksonville, I mean, you said that you wanted a warehouse closer to your home, but between Jacksonville and Hillsborough Township, are there any other locations that are closer to a highway? I mean, have you been to the property on Weston Road? I mean, you know how narrow those roads are. You know how there are ditches on either sides of those roads. Yes. I mean, it's sort of unseemly to have tractor trailer
Ms.
trucks
Haas,
with
can we
large
just keep with
containers.
questions? Just, I know,
I'm trying to get to the-
well,
not
because I
answering
stopped the
my
other
questions,
gentleman from
so-
going
Okay.
off on
Yeah, I'll-
making general statements. I just want to,
I'm almost there.
Okay,
I
thank you.
appreciate what you're saying. Okay, so where will trucks go before the hours of opening? So in other words, you have like one-lane roads in each direction on Weston Road, and like if a truck gets there before you're open in the morning, where would you expect them to go? Because I see a lot of trucks parked on Hillsborough roads during the day, and my assumption about those are that they can't get into the facilities that they're trying to get into. And given a one-lane road and a sort of nasty traffic situation over there, I mean, it's not a traffic question. I'm asking where operationally would the trucks be able to go if they got there before you were open?
I'll let traffic answer that, and I'll defer that question to them.
Okay. And I would just happen to mention, in case you haven't heard, that, you know, you're also in an airport zone, and just this past week, we had a plane crash that was taken off from that airport, and it crashed on an adjacent property. Okay, so I think that is the end of my questions, but I would be very curious as to whether or not anybody is going to be talking about Cotton Valley Home and what the relationship is between the two companies, because I think it's important.
Thank you, Ms. Haas.
Thank you.
Susan, you better jump because I'm going to move on if you want to ask questions.
I didn't want to cut anyone.
No, you did. Cut, because we got to keep things moving. I think we got 2 more witnesses tonight. and
Okay. Susan
time's
Gulliford, Hunt
running
Club
out.
Road.
Thank you.
I have a question about Miracle Brands. I know they make the sheets that, when I looked at your site, said they have a type of silver in them. I realized when I listened to last week's information, there's other things, dryer sheets, degreasers, that type of stuff. I have a question about whether any toxic, if there was a fire there, which we've had experience in Hillsborough with warehouse fires, is there anything, if it prevents bacterial growth, I assume the FDA is involved. So storage is apparently not a problem. What about a fire? Would we need special equipment with our fire company, or would special equipment be installed in the building?
It is a sprinkler
One second,
built-
Mr. O'Grady, if you could let the witness answer the questions, please. Thank you.
He was answering the question.
I did.
I saw it, don't worry. I know where you're going. Let's just keep going. I don't want to bicker.
I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't nothing with you.
Oh.
I got to keep
Okay.
everyone separate. I saw it.
The building is a sprinkler building, so, yeah.
It's sprinklered, and it would have whatever special equipment was needed for these types of fumes in case there was a fire.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think you hit all the others. The problem with trucking that we've had over on Camp Plain, I guess it was, and the ownership of Lot 7. I was going to ask, what if someone else redeems that? But it appears there's a question about the ownership on that, because I thought it would change your building construction and your design. But I guess when we get to whoever owns it now, that may answer the question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, I think we're done with public. You look like you wanted to ask another, or you're good? I'm good. You're just looking at me, okay. So, Mr. Gronick, we're ready for your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Gary Dean. He's our professional traffic engineer from Dolan and Dean in Somerville, New Jersey.
If I could, just before we get involved, please sit down, Mr. Dean.
Thank you.
So, in effort as the terms to keep can we keep the commentary out of the questioning? Please. You have a question, state the question, have the answer, have another question. Don't have a commentary in between. Save the commentary, if you have any, for at the end. It just will allow, the testimony to move freely and for the record to be clean and the transcript to be clean for people to look at as opposed to all the filler and comments in between. So ask the question, get the answer, ask another question. And that will make everything go much more smoothly for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Dean.
Yes, I do. Certainly, Gary Dean, D-E-A-N.
Could you give the board the benefit of your qualifications?
Certainly, I'm a graduate of Lehigh University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering. I'm a former member of the faculty of Lehigh University and Lafayette College, having served as an adjunct professor teaching transportation engineering. I've been a licensed professional engineer in New Jersey since 1988 and a licensed professional planner since 1990. I have appeared before this board countless times over the past 35 years for such projects that include Green Village, Gateway at Sunnymead that I know has a different name now on Falcon Road next to the Polish Falcons, among many other projects throughout the community. My license is in good standing and is current.
Okay, any objections from the board members? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
At the request of the applicant, our office initially prepared a traffic impact analysis entitled for Terrace Industrial Park that's dated July 22nd of 2022. That has been submitted to the board and has been reviewed by the board's professionals, but principally Mr. Hay and his colleagues with Pannoni Associates. In response to several review letters that have been generated by your board engineer, our office submitted a supplemental analysis in the form of a letter addressed to the board on December 30th of 2022, and then most recently on February 28th of 2023. I'll go through each one of those in fairly broad detail. I would like to acknowledge, however, that when the traffic study was first prepared, it was for the larger building, 140,000 and plus square feet. As you've heard from Mr. Ford, the overall proposal has been reduced in scale, so it is now a smaller building. Because traffic impacts have a general correlation to the size of a building, the attendant impacts associated with a smaller building would be less than we have otherwise identified in our traffic study. That doesn't warrant a complete reanalysis, but as we begin to discuss numbers, roughly the traffic impacts and projected traffic would be about 7% less, which is proportionate to the overall scope reduction. As part of our study, we completed an inventory of the roads surrounding the site, principally Weston Road. We also looked at Sunnymead Road and Boyd Boulevard and Waterman Lane that we know serve the adjacent community. Our traffic counts were conducted for the first study during what we consider to be peak traffic hours. And in traffic engineering parlance, that's customarily during our traditional commuter rush hours, somewhere between 7 and 9 in the morning, and then from 4 to 6:30 at night. And as personnel are present on the site and we've collected data through a variety of means, we've had machines out there, we've had video out there, we've had personnel out at the premises to physically count each individual car and truck that goes by. We've identified the peak hour, and that's a term that you'll hear me mention numerous times throughout this presentation, but the peak hour is when the concentration of traffic is highest. So even though it's a 24-hour day, and even though we know that there's traffic in the midday hours, as engineers, we are focused on when the infrastructure is most constrained. And so we look at those peak hours. And just for reference, we identify that to occur from 7:30 in the morning to 8:30 and from 5 to 6 at night. In the appendix to our report, there are figures, and I'll first reference to the July 22nd, 2022 report. Figure 2 shows the peak hour traffic both during the morning and the evening. And just for reference, during that morning peak from 7:30 to 8:30, we identified 460 vehicles on Weston Road, almost balanced between east and west, going toward Manville and obviously towards Route 206. And at that time, we identified 32 trucks in 1 hour traveling on Weston Road. So it clearly accommodates truck activity presently. I'll go into further detail as to the nature of those trucks, but it is certainly carrying maybe 8% of its total volume consists of truck traffic. In the evening peak hour between 5 and 6 p.m., we identified 570 vehicles traveling on Weston Road, again, generally evenly balanced between east and westbound direction, with a total of 18 trucks identified during that hour. And as clearly we get toward the tail end of the business day, we traditionally find fewer and fewer trucks on the road than we see in the morning. The next component of the traffic study is to provide an evaluation of how well driveways and intersections are functioning based on that existing traffic activity. And that's a term traffic engineers use called level of service. And it's a descriptive term that's developed to help, principally through this type of process, akin to a report card, where A represents a very favorable level of service, and that's a delay that we as drivers experience of between 0 seconds and 5 seconds. So as a driver, we pull up to an intersection, we look left, we look right, and at very high levels of service, we proceed almost immediately. At the lower end of the spectrum is level of service F, and we've certainly seen that in select locations throughout the township. But that's a condition where, as a driver, we wait in excess of 50 seconds to turn. Route 206 is a great example. There are numerous driveways where it is a challenge to turn onto the highway during peak hours, and that is representative of a level of service F condition. As we use the nearest intersection to the site, which is Boyd Boulevard, we identified that movements in and out of that driveway as a function of the traffic on Weston Road are operating at level of service B, as in boy. So a very high service level indicative of, I'd say, a very comfortable means of ingress and egress. The next step in our overall evaluation is to project the amount of traffic associated with the subject application. As I mentioned, those traffic projections are a function of the size of the building. A 10,000 square foot building generates substantially less traffic than a 1 million square foot building. So within that range, we look at data that has been compiled by other consultants, engineers, planning agencies, going out and actually studying existing warehouses. That information has been compiled over the past 40-plus years by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, known by the acronym of ITE. ITE compiles all of this data that is voluntarily submitted, but it is used to develop, I'll say, statistical models that allow anyone to review the data, and based on the size of the building or how many units there are in a residential community, looking at that empirical data to develop a forecast of what a building of a certain size would generate. And in our original study, going back to July of last year, we had projected the traffic associated with the formally proposed 140,000 155 square foot warehouse. I'll refer you, if anyone has the study, to page 6 of that report, and on table 1 it shows those projections. Using that ITE data, it shows that during the morning peak hour, there would be approximately 30 cars entering and perhaps 7 cars exiting, for a total of 37 traffic movements in 1 hour. In addition to that traffic, which would principally be drop-off, employees arriving, employees perhaps leaving, we did evaluate and look at the ITE data for trucks. And in that same morning peak hour, the data shows that there would be 1 entering truck and perhaps 2 exiting trucks in that 1 hour. So we would have a total of 40 trips, 40 traffic movements in 1 hour. Now, if we're sitting here and we think of 40 cars all at once and trucks, it seems like a lot all at once. What needs to be considered is that this is over the course of 60 minutes. So it's a little bit more, but it's about 1 car or 1 truck coming in or out or leaving the site every other minute. Maybe a minute and 45 seconds. It's a very low volume activity. And as we get to the evening peak hour, I'll share the same numbers. We might have on the order of 10 cars entering, 29 leaving, for a total of 40 movements, and 2 trucks entering, 2 trucks exiting during that same hour, for a total of 43 trips. The next step in our evaluation is to figure out or estimate how would people get to and from the site. And in our initial estimate, and just looking at the patterns that are on Weston Road, recognizing that movements to the east bring you into Manville, that allows access to points, say 287 to the south and the New Jersey Turnpike. Alternatively, movements to and from the west and north takes one to Route 206, ultimately up to perhaps Route 22, 78, 287, and the like. We estimated that the patterns of traffic would be 52% to and from the west, closer to toward 206, and 48% of that traffic to and from the east. I'll cover a little bit later in my presentation more about the trucks. But when we're looking at the bulk of the traffic with 90% of the traffic consisting of automobiles, those are the patterns that we first considered. The next step in our study is then to take account for what will the future hold? What can we reasonably forecast in terms of additional traffic growth, irrespective of this application? What other things are going on close to the site that may increase traffic? It is customary practice that we use a background traffic growth rate, where we don't know of any specific developments of a certain magnitude. We use this background growth rate to account for smaller infill projects and just general growth. Since COVID, however, we've seen some changes in traffic activity. We now see more people working remotely. We now see a much greater increase in e-commerce, where people are making fewer shopping-related trips and having more things delivered to their home. With the advent of DoorDash and Grubhub, we have the same type where people aren't driving as much and they're staying in their homes. We then couple that with an aging population, where more and more individuals, particularly since the pandemic, have elected to retire, and that has certainly suppressed traffic. We've not assumed that that would be the case in the future. We've assumed, as is our customary practice, that traffic continues to climb, not at a heavy growth rate like we saw in the 80s throughout the municipality and even the 90s. It's fairly stabilized, but as we look at the data that's used by NJDOT, we've assumed that there will be a nominal 1% background traffic growth increase. So we've added that to our overall projections to account for, again, those other smaller developments. We then prepared a sort of a layering. So we have our base traffic conditions. We then have a background traffic growth rate, and then finally, we superimpose the traffic associated with the subject application. And we then prepare this same level of service analysis that gives us a comparison of what will the future look like with and without the added traffic from the site. The nearest intersection is obviously Boyd Boulevard. And in the future, that will continue to operate at very favorable levels of service B conditions. As we superimpose and add the site traffic, remembering that it's less than 1 car a minute, that's imperceptible to a traffic engineer, other than by standing on the side of the road and clicking and measuring traffic over an hour. The average motorist could not discern that type of impact, particularly as some goes east towards Manville and some goes west towards Route 206 and Sunnymead Road. As we add the projected site traffic, we would have no change in level of service. There would be no effect on Boyd Boulevard. That would continue to operate at level of service B. And the site driveways would also operate at levels of service B and at level of service A. So we actually have very favorable projected conditions associated with the proposed development of the site. In response to the first review by Pannoni Associates, they had raised some concerns about what we call off-track intersections. Those are locations further removed from the site, but would obviously carry some of the additional site traffic. And it was requested that we specifically look at Sunnymead Road and also at Sunnymead and Falcon Road. As the board may know, a traffic signal was fairly recently installed at Falcon Road and Sunnymead Road. That was done as part of the Gateway at Sunnymead project. Our office was the design consultant for that particular signal, and we prepared all of the future traffic projections and looked at how that would operate. As a result of that request, we went back out to the site last November 17th of 2022, during the same peak hours, and we compiled that additional data to see what would the effect of this additional site traffic be on those particular intersections. We did the same type of comparative analysis between the conditions we call no build, that is the future traffic scenario that does not include the site. And at Sunnymead Road and Weston Road, we have very similar conditions. Level of service B, turning in and out of Sunnymead Road. Because Falcon Road is operated by the signal, the delays in the morning are level of service B, but in the evening, there's one movement coming off Falcon Road, turning left, that operates at level of service C. That's just a function of the signal. You have to wait for the light to turn, so people, because of the way it's programmed, wait a little bit longer because it favors the north-south movements on Sunnymead. As we look at the effect of the site traffic on both of those locations, there would be no change in level of service, so they would be unaffected. We've actually numerically quantified the difference in operating condition, and at Sunnymead and Weston, the additional site traffic would result in an increase in delay of 0.3 seconds. Just like that. It's inconsequential from a traffic perspective. So that tells me that the additional site traffic has no effect on Sunnymead and Weston Road. At Falcon Road, a little bit longer, but it's 0.6 seconds, not even a whole second of additional delay. So as we start to look at other locations further removed from the site, for example, at Falcon and 206, the traffic impacts are even further reduced. So in my opinion, the supplemental analysis concluded that the proposed site operation would in no way affect any of the off-track intersections near the site. And when the use was considered and made a permitted use, the general expectation is that the governing body and this board felt that the traffic impacts would be appropriate. Finally, in February of this year, we received review number 2 from Pannoni Associates, and it was a request to identify the projected operations. As you've heard, the proposal includes a certain number of employees during those peak hours that would operate on various shifts. What's important is, if you recall, our peak hour was from 7:30 to 8:30 and 5 to 6 at night. The peak arrivals of site employees fall outside of the peak hours of the roadway system. Our study assumed that they would occur simultaneously. So in my opinion, we have overstated the projected impacts. It was also requested, or we furnished the board and your consultant with some background on the different types of warehouses, because even though you've heard there's a known end user, obviously this is a use that runs with the land. Once a warehouse is built, it could be used for any type of warehouse. Our projections considered a traditional warehouse use. By way of background, there are several other types of warehouse uses known as high cube warehouses, and I've appended all of the different descriptions. They are not germane to this application, but if, for example, a cold storage warehouse were to one day occupy the building, its traffic would be less than we've analyzed in our study. So of all the different types of warehouse uses, we have used the highest traffic generator except for one, and that's what's called a parcel hub warehouse, which is a UPS, FedEx, terminal type warehouse or distribution center that deals with time-sensitive materials. This is not that type of use. So hopefully the board can feel comfortable that given all the different potential warehouse uses, the one that we've chosen and used in our study yields the highest traffic projections. So that would account for any other potential future end user of the site. We have also reviewed the routes of approach and departure for trucks. As you've heard from the applicant, the inbound movement of goods would originate from Port Elizabeth. In looking at the best route to the subject site, looking at time and distance, the best route to the site is to take Route 78 through the Somerville Circle, down Route 206 to Camplain Road, and then down Sunnymead Road. None of those local streets prohibit truck traffic, so they are available as that route. However, there are times where we know Route 206 isn't always as passable as we'd like. We also know that, I'll say, events happen on the regional highway system. So the alternative route for those trucks originating to and from Port Elizabeth is to go through Manville, go up River Road, and then pick up Route 22 or ultimately to Route 287 and go, I'll say, the back end to get to Port Elizabeth. In addition, we have considered the outbound trucks, that is the vendors that would serve the shipments once they are sorted, packaged, and ready for transport. Those include FedEx, UPS, and DHL. FedEx maintains a terminal distribution point in Branchburg, New Jersey. They also have another one, and forgive me, I forgot my notes, so if you'll bear with me a moment. They also have a distribution center on Talmadge Road in Edison, New Jersey, and then one in Monmouth Junction. At this point, I don't think anybody, including the applicant, knows which FedEx terminal will ultimately be used. If it is the one in Branchburg, that traffic would be oriented towards the northwest and would travel Weston Road to Sunnymead or out to Falcon, 206, and then to Route 22. If it's traveling to Edison, my expectation is that Route 287 South would have those trucks traveling through Manville to the east, and then continuing south on Route 287. While I can't see the facility in Monmouth Junction being used, again, that would necessitate travel down the turnpike, and would be an eastern distribution. UPS maintains a distribution facility on Chimney Rock Road in Martinsville. Again, depending on the time of day and traffic, one could take 206 to 22, or one could come up through Manville, ultimately getting to Foothill Road and then to Chimney Rock Road. And then finally, DHL, all of their facilities for distribution, Avenel, Elizabeth, or Carteret, all would involve traffic to and from the east, and those routes principally would involve Route 287, so those trucks would continue to the east through Manville. Obviously, the township has post office, but I don't expect that that would be used by tractor trailers. Lastly, we performed, and this isn't in any of our reports, but anticipating the hypothetical what if my projections aren't correct? What if the applicant has underestimated the potential number of employees? Maybe it's 70 instead of 55 or 65. We performed an iterative analysis to identify at what point would the site driveway fail from a traffic engineering perspective. At what point would there be insufficient opportunities for site traffic to safely exit onto Weston Road and then travel east or west? And we basically run our modeling, and we just keep adding traffic to the model. At 360 vehicles leaving the site in 1 hour, at that point, that would be level of service E. The 361st vehicle would result in a delay of level of service F. So I call it a sensitivity analysis because it tells us that even if the projections are off by a factor of 2, we're still going to have very good levels of service leaving the site. So whether it's 55 or 65 or 75, it's not particularly relevant in terms of safety. I would also say that at that same volume of 360, with the traffic that continues east towards Sunnymead and Weston and to Falcon, that the resultant levels of service, even at that volume, would go to level of service C at Weston Road and level of service E at Falcon Road. But that is a hypothetical academic exercise only, and you can tell it's almost approaching the traffic that's on Weston Road today. So it is a gross overestimation of the projected traffic, but I did want to at least acknowledge that type of scale or spectrum in terms of traffic impact, and at what point does this operation or any use of the site become, I'll say, problematic or need mitigation. Lastly, we have reviewed the plans throughout the project inception, worked with Mr. Ford's office. As you've heard from the applicant, the overall design allows for staging of vehicles on a site. This is a fairly customary practice for warehouse operations, in that trucks cannot always be filled or unloaded on the same given day, and that it allows for flexibility for those vehicles to enter the site without waiting on the public streets. In terms of the question I'll anticipate from the public, the what if, what happens when a truck shows up before hours? There are no restrictions in terms of the site access. I've been involved with sites where there have been gates. That is not the proposal. However, time is money to shipping companies, and if there is not an individual present to receive that shipment, it cannot be left. That needs to be inventoried and the proper accounting and paperwork done before that vehicle arrives and departs. So with those hours to be established and coordinated through the companies, I believe, in my opinion, from a traffic engineer's perspective, it obviates the potential for a truck to be sitting on the side of the road or waiting on site in the wee hours of the morning, waiting for the first employee at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning. Because that truck sits idle, it's no longer productive, and that affects, has financial implications to that trucking company. So with the logistics surrounding that, I feel fairly confident that that is not a very likely scenario at all. I would also submit that activity that is typically a nuisance to abutting neighbors, which is principally noise, is governed by state statute as well as the municipal noise ordinance. So activities that violate that standard before 7 a.m. and after 10 p.m., those are prohibited, and certainly summonses can be issued if that ever were to occur, but there is a safeguard to prohibit that type of activity. With that, I think I've concluded my direct presentation. Mr. Ogrodnik, if I've done everything? Thank you.
Hello there, engineer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dean, you referred to some of the review letters from Pannoni Associates. Is this better? Mr. Dean, you referred to some review letters from our office.
Correct.
And I'm looking at, I think, is our latest letter dated May 1st, 2023. Do you have a copy of that?
I do.
I believe there's one item still we're waiting to have satisfied, and that goes to a portion of comment number 1, whereby our team asked that you provide testimony regarding the anticipated operation of the site, including utilization of provided trailer parking and loading docks. I don't recall hearing any testimony from you this evening or addressing that particular issue, and I think what the office is looking for is how does the parking and loading docks proposed correlate with the traffic that you're anticipating?
Sure. There really is no means to, I'll say, not reconcile, but account for the given number of loading docks in a given building and its traffic. The ITE background data is based on the size of the building. And obviously, bigger buildings have more loading docks, so there is some linear relationship between the number of docks provided and the size of the building. There are 139 parking spaces proposed. There are 28 trailer parking spaces and 20 loading docks. Those docks allow a truck to leave a trailer, as you've heard described by the applicant, and over time those trailers can be filled. In addition, that would be the shipping side. There's also the receiving side, where a trailer is brought to the site, and then that trailer is then unloaded over time, and the number of parking spaces for those trailers just allows for empty trailers to be stored on the site prior to their pickup. I don't know how to better describe warehouse operations, but that is typically the function, in that it allows for the simultaneous loading, unloading of trucks, and for any idle trailers that have not yet been picked up. I should point out that this is a single loaded design. By that I mean the loading docks are all on one side of the building. The concerns that I hear as a traffic consultant for quote-unquote warehouse applications pertains to double-loaded buildings, that those are the ones that are customarily used by Amazon, in that Trucks are loaded from one side, but then trucks are driven into the building from the other side as they are then staged and filled within the building and then depart from the other side of the building. That's why those buildings have both ends so that vehicles can drive back and forth. That is not the case for this building. This is a traditional storage warehouse that allows for the movement of goods, the inventory of goods to account for seasonal demands, and to rotate inventory as needed by the end user. So that's about as good as I can do. That's as much as I can offer at this point.
I appreciate that, but I think our team is looking for a little bit more details into how long, what's the turnover time on a dock in order to generate the trips that you're anticipating, that you utilize in your traffic report. So I think what the team's trying, and I heard from last week, a lot of residents are going to ask these similar questions. How does your traffic report correlate with your anticipated usage of the loading docks?
Sure.
I mean, what's the turnover time on a dock?
Well, that I can't necessarily answer. What I can address is that our traffic study, as I identified, looks at the system when it's most constrained. In other words, when it's busiest. And if we find that we have acceptable operations during those peak times, logically, as we get to 10 in the morning or noon or 1 in the afternoon when traffic is lower, there's still movement of trucks in and out of the facility. There's still loading and unloading that occurs. Our studies don't look at 24-hour basis. We look at evaluating, it's similar to a pipe analogy. How can the pipe flow at its peak demand? We don't care when there's dribble. We want to know when it's, we need to fight a fire. So that's the best analogy I can draw. So obviously a facility generates truck activity throughout the day. We just have not studied that in as much as we look at as I indicated, the system when it's most constrained. And again, our numbers, and I'm sure you're aware, the Institute of Transportation Engineers and ITE publishes the data not only for automobiles but for trucks. All of that information has been appended to our report, and so we are following that accepted professional practice.
Well, in your opinion, did you help identify the number of loading docks required to service this building?
I did not, no.
And do you have an opinion on whether or not 20 loading docks is sufficient to handle the traffic that you're anticipating, or is it more than it's needed for the traffic you're anticipating?
I have no opinion on that. I look at the impact on the roadway system, how it affects and why it's needed for the site design and layout. I cannot offer. I'm not an architect. I have no opinion on that.
And were you involved in the decision as to how many trailer parking spaces are to be provided on site?
No.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Boyce, you have any? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we will be introducing a witness that's an expert in warehouse operations and will be able to address these questions.
Okay, fair enough. Objector now.
I'm going to reserve, Mr. Chairman, if I may, until we see what everybody else has to say, so I don't duplicate.
So, to the objectors, or do we want to?
The board first.
So I'll ask me, obviously, the ITE studies, you're talking about peak time. Do they give you an indication of what total anticipated numbers are for a building that size?
Yes.
And did you testify to what that was?
I did not. I'll have to look that up. I don't have it right here, so I'll have to, it'll take me some time to find that.
Okay, so we'll let you look for that while we're looking. So, secondly, maybe the logistics person will add that when these trucks are dropped off, because obviously the previous testimony wasn't sure, are these trucks, when they're dropping off these trailers, was your opinion that these trucks were then leaving empty, or were they picking up an empty trailer and taking that with them?
There is some of that activity as well. As you heard from Mr. Arif, when a trailer is left, it takes some time to be unloaded. Having the tractor wait there doesn't make sense. So the tractor leaves with an empty trailer, so there's a constant rotation of full and empty. The truck is leaving regardless. It's just more efficient for him to take a trailer with it after he drops off a full one.
That was in your studies, that kind of activity?
Correct. Which is why, for example, in the evening peak hour, you may recall, we estimated 2 trucks coming in and 2 trucks leaving. We don't look at it as to whether it's the same truck. It's a truck, but presumably it would be arriving full and leaving empty, or vice versa.
Okay. I'll let you look for the other stuff, and I'll defer to any other questions you might have.
I'm going purely by memory before I look it up, and I have to evaluate the program. But the board is reviewing another application that I believe totals 550,000 square feet, and that generates 160 trucks per day. So just if I proportion that to the subject site, it works out to be about 38 truck trips per day. So that's...
So that's 38 in, 38 out? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. So a couple of things. I jotted some notes. He said that about 48% of the inbound was coming from the west, meaning down 206 Camplain Road.
I believe it was 52, but...
Oh, it's more that coming from that.
It's 50-50.
It's 50-50. Okay. Did you anticipate with the widening of 206 and a Jersey barrier going down there, they're not going to be able to make that left turn into Camplain someday? So it's going to wind up going down to Triangle Road to do that jug handle.
Correct.
Tractor trailers aren't very fast going around jug handles and causing potential, we basically do an analysis of the backup that's going to occur on Triangle Road trying to get out of there.
With one entering truck in the morning, I can't forecast that with any degree of accuracy.
Right, but it's going to travel a different route, so going down Falcon. So we're going to have all the traffic going down Falcon Road eventually.
Correct.
Okay. What would have been the second best route? I guess the one I just described is to go down Triangle Road, do the jug handle around Triangle down Falcon.
I'm not understanding the question. It comes 206 south, it'll use the jug handle and continue east on Falcon. When it leaves, and again, there are no restrictions on Sunny Mead, there are no restrictions on Camplain, it could leave that way because the barrier doesn't affect that traffic at that point.
Not down there. It's just, you do have some S-turns there, so I doubt they're going to stay in the lane. But the other thing I didn't hear mentioned, because I know the vision for the business is to be direct to the big box stores, essentially moving away from direct to consumer. I didn't hear any discussion about the how to move the goods to the big box stores. I'm assuming they're going to be in trailers versus FedEx trucks. Did you do that type of an analysis?
No, and again, all of the traffic projections and trucks are for a warehouse use. I know the board is specifically looking at one particular end user. I look at it a little bit more globally in that, we all hope that this business flourishes and remains a corporate citizen of Hillsborough for decades. Business climate changes. We've seen that over the past 3 years. So we look at it in terms of what would be the typical traffic generation for any warehouse of 130,000 square feet. And I did want to get that number. It's 39 truck trips for this size building, or 39 trucks per day. Now that's far less than what the applicant has projected, and I'm going strictly to ITE. I think and I would hope that you see a certain benefit in terms of a fairly nominal truck activity based on the description you heard of operations. But I look at it of, okay, a site generates 39 trucks per day. It's open from 7 to 7, 12, that's 3 trucks an hour. I personally, as a traffic engineer, I don't get excited about 3 trucks an hour. As we look to Robbinsville, which is 1 million plus square feet and 2,000 employees at peak time, that's a big traffic impact. This, by contrast, is, and as we look at some going east and some going west, 1 truck, not for this applicant's use, but for a traditional warehouse, an hour. At Falcon Road and Triangle, I just can't get
Right. I'm just saying that that's going to be the direction of the traffic. But I'm still going back with the types of trucks, because you did make quite a mention of the FedEx trucks. So when we talk about trucks, are we talking about 18-wheelers all the time? Or you're doing a mix of trucks, meaning we're going to see FedEx leaving out of there. But, as I asked, you didn't have any testimony towards that big box stores and delivery to them. So
right. That as I heard from the applicant's testimony, that's a reach. That's a future objective if they're so successful.
I took it that was his right now his target, not necessarily a reach, but something that he feels very realistically as the direction of his business.
Sure.
So so we should have had that analysis in here, because I don't think that was something that was far-fetched. That's his I'm going to call it intermediate range vision in a few years. I mean, so we should have had that. The other thing I didn't see in the analysis, I know we were looking at peak hours, but in both of those peak hours analysis, it basically said there was absolutely no traffic coming in and out of Hartstone. So I'm very curious to see analysis of the peak traffic coming in and out of Hartstone, to see how that's going to be impacted by the truck traffic.
Yeah, we included that, Mr. Chairman. That's Boyd Boulevard. That is their access. They have a secondary gated access, Waterman.
Right.
But Boyd Boulevard serves the community, and so the effect of this application on Hearthstone is zero change in level of service. So that analysis, all of their traffic counts were included in our study. Okay. They're featured on Figure 2 of the original report. But we have consistently recognized the proximity to that community, and I wanted to ensure that we did analyze it right up front.
Right, but that wouldn't be their peak traffic coming in and out of that development as the same as that you determined with the morning rush and afternoon rush.
Correct. I don't know when their peak is. I look at the peak of the roadway when we have 500 cars an hour on Weston.
Right.
But
it would be helpful, because obviously that is the community that's going to be the most impacted. Not everyone else that's transient going through there.
Sure, I'm not explaining myself. If their peak is at 9:30 or 10 in the morning, there's no traffic associated with the subject site. I mean, there might be a truck during that peak hour. So even though that's Hearthstone's peak, there's far less traffic on Weston Road at that time, and there's nominal entering and exiting the site at that time. So
Maybe we'll talk to the logistics person. I kind of doubt there's going to be almost no traffic happening during normal business hours.
Well, not the truck traffic. There would be. The employees have to be there to receive the shipment. So the warehouse staff will be present at 7 in the morning as they begin their receiving. At 10 in the morning, like any business, there might be a straggler. If there's an admin person showing up, but it's for an operating business, they've opened prior to then. There might be a vendor who comes in, a salesperson, but it's not anything related to the employee shifts or arrivals and departures.
I mean, the point I was driving at is more, a truck going in, making left turns is going to, block traffic, essentially. They're not as quick moving as a salesman's car or something. That was where I would have liked to have seen a little bit more analysis.
I can't do that analysis. It's not possible in that, other than creating some form or showing you a video of an industrial driveway and how a tractor moves, they have to move slow. We didn't design the access so that they can come
I know,
in
'cause
at 35 miles an hour, nor would we want them to. But a truck, like any other vehicle, traveling on a public roadway, if it's on Weston Road, it has right-of-way. And so anyone exiting Hearthstone has to yield to that traffic that has right-of-way, whether it's a car or a slow-moving truck. But this board and the governing body made this a permitted use. You can't have an industrial use without truck traffic. So we assumed that that was taken into consideration when the zoning was created to make this a permitted use. In terms of the overall impacts, I just want to reiterate, the applicant's testimony was that there would be 6 to 10 outbound trucks per day and 4 to 10 inbound trucks per day. If we take the high end, that's 20 trucks per day. The ITE data shows it closer to 40. So this applicant's proposal far suppresses the projected truck activity than we would otherwise expect if I just went right to the book and used ITE. So in terms of things you know, I think having heard that testimony, we can't have a warehouse use that generates 0 truck trips.
No, I'm not saying that. It's just
But I think
looking
that is a fairly innocuous volume in terms of, it would be double otherwise if we didn't know the end user.
Right. But we'll hear from the logistics person, because I know that the applicant, wasn't 100% sure about the operations and was deferring quite a bit to his logistics expert. So we'll verify those.
Understood.
So, okay. Anything else from the board?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about the outbound trucks you were describing going to the FedEx terminal, UPS, DHL. What types of trucks were you talking about there?
Those are tractor trailers. That was the applicant's testimony, is that they would deliver a full-size trailer. It would be filled over time, and that when it is full, they would arrange for a pickup of that trailer for that commercial shipper. So I don't rule out the fact that there may be smaller parcel vans, the same vans that are delivering to residences or other businesses, but we've been focused on tractor trailers.
Okay. So how did you determine the inbound route from the Port Elizabeth?
Google Maps, nothing more complicated than that. You pick an origin, you pick a destination, you look at different times of day, and it will provide, based on traffic conditions and routing, the quickest and most direct route to the site. I did realize, and it obviously produces the alternative route, which takes one through Manville to River Road and Route 287, and then ultimately to the Turnpike northbound. But the Route 78 route is the quickest. So if it was a morning delivery, because Route 78 rather is eastbound, the westbound flow really has much fewer delays than does eastbound traffic. So at that time of day, I would envision that to be a more favorable route, as is Route 287 south in the morning.
Do you know what time the school opens on Sunnymead?
I do not. It's an elementary school, as I recall, so I'd estimate 8:15, 8:20, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, my kids went there, I don't remember, but so.
I recognize the sensitivity to Sunnymead Road. Obviously, I'm aware of it. Absent any changes that the governing body could impose to restrict truck traffic, right now it's free to be used. Obviously, this process has accentuated some sensitivity, but it's beyond the applicant's ability to control that. But if the governing body were to limit that activity, obviously it moves it over to Falcon. So there are remedies that are available, but to the best of my knowledge, there were no restrictions. But
okay, is for the ITE. Now, this is kind of went in reverse order here of what you talked about. I understand it's based on the size. Is that typically for a spec warehouse?
Well, the data is developed by counting the traffic to and from an occupied warehouse. So there is no such thing as spec in ITE. It's a given land use. For example, most homes are built on spec. Most offices and retail stores are, in fact, virtually every use is built on spec. So the ITE data is a function of whoever's in the building at the time. Guy like me goes out, counts the ins and outs, compiles the data, we ship it off to ITE, and over the course of dozens, if not hundreds, of empirical studies, a statistical model is developed in terms of warehouse size. Because this particular land use has surfaced as very sensitive in New Jersey, our office, working with other consultants, has actually gone out and looked at New Jersey warehouses. You'll be hearing me talk about this for other applications. Most of the warehouses are 200,000 square feet and bigger. In every single case, the ITE data, I think there was one where it was spot on. In every single case, the ITE data is greater than what we're finding out in the field. So, these are sites in Carteret, Monroe, Cranberry, Piscataway, East Windsor, and all of the data, including truck trips, has been evaluated. By one example, 600,000 square foot warehouse in Mercer County. This was studied in 2019. Generated 8 truck trips in the morning peak hour, 4 in, 4 out, and 3 at night. That's 5 times bigger than the building we've proposed. So that's why I think the testimony I presented of 1 or 2 trucks per peak hour comports with not only the IT data, but what we're seeing, of warehouses in New Jersey. So I rely on ITE, and I think it's buttressed by this new information. I'm not introducing it for this particular application. I'm referencing it just because it is one more data set that's available. But if the board would like it, we'll certainly provide you with it.
All right, I was just wondering if since there is a known tenant, and I think it's actually in bits and pieces of your testimony already, so kind of I don't want to say I'm throwing him a softball here, but that if there's a known tenant, you would be able to use a more accurate projection of truck traffic and ins and outs rather than ITE, which in my mind, you don't know who's in it. It's a spec. You're kind of confirming that it can be a spec building. It doesn't matter who's in it. You're using the probabilistic, I don't know if it's actuarial or not, but the statistics to determine the number of trucks.
I'm almost compelled to, and the reason is, not necessarily this board, but I've certainly been before other boards, where we introduce site-specific testimony and projections, and that falls on my shoulder. And the first thing a critic of the application says, yeah, well, that's for this user. We don't know what that building will be in 10 years. You need to use ITE, and you need to use, real-world data. So
it's both ways, right?
I'm caught between a rock and a hard place here. Yeah. So I think you've heard the testimony from the applicant, but I'd be remiss if I didn't follow the book per se and use the published data because, as I said, this is a use that runs with the land, and it's something that we do know, and we have information from the end user, and I'm very pleased to see it's less than all of my projections. So I would hope that gives the board a certain level of comfort, but if he's wrong, hey, we go back to IT and it all still works.
One last question. Did you said you were there numerous times. You were at the site, several studies. Did you ever do any studies on the weekend?
No.
Okay. That's all I have.
Anyone else from the board? Okay. Counselor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you guys usually take a break. Do you want to do that now?
I'm going to ask my son. I'm getting a nod, so yeah. So we will take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 15:45.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back on. All righty. Now, Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dean, my name is Mike Sinkovich. I represent the Hearthstone at Hillsborough Homeowners Association, and I do have a few questions to follow up what a lot of the questions were already asked. I just wanted to start. I have a feeling like a lot of the community is just confused by how this whole process works with the ITE and with the level of service and all of that. I'm not asking you to totally redo your testimony, but for the level of service analysis, can you just explain how it works, like with the traffic counts and then ITE and what's the interplay there?
Sure. Well, level of service, as I mentioned, is this descriptive term that as drivers give us a sense of how congested or poorly a road operates versus how freely or comfortably it does. In our report, we included a description of what level of service is, and it's a scale based on time that we as drivers experience while awaiting our turn to get through an intersection. And as I indicated, A is a very good level of service where we're pausing. We pull up, look left, look right, and we go. F is at the other end of the scale. Those levels of service are determined by the road itself, whether it's a one-lane road in each direction, 2 lanes in each direction, because obviously it's more difficult to turn across a 4-lane road than a 2-lane road. And it's a function of the volume of the road itself. And other factors enter into that, for example, the percentages of trucks on the road and the percentages and types of the characteristic of vehicles that are turning. So as we look at a given intersection, those types of parameters are included in the modeling, and we develop levels of service that is, again, a function of volume. So the busier a road is, generally the worse the level of service is.
And you take, the busyness of the road is done by actual field counts that your office does?
Correct.
And you did, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did one set of traffic counts in, I believe it was October of 2021?
Correct.
And those were at, can you remind me what intersections those were at?
We did it at Boyd and Weston, principally. I mean, Waterman didn't generate any traffic. So those counts were first done at that one particular location. Subsequent to that, in, I believe, November of 22, we then were back out on Weston Road, and we looked at Sunnymead, and we looked at Falcon Road.
Okay. So 2 questions on that. First, when you went back out in November of 2022, you didn't look back at Boyd and Weston, is that correct?
No.
Okay. And Waterman is a gated off or blocked off intersection anyway, right?
Correct. That's, I mean, there's no traffic that uses it, but it's there.
And for October of 2021, that was during COVID, wasn't it?
I mean, I think COVID ended today, so I don't want to, be glib, but it's like, was it COVID, wasn't it COVID? That's okay. We went out and redid our counts in November of 22, presumably after COVID was, quote unquote, over, schools were back in session, and, normal conditions, to the extent we can characterize those, had resumed. There's no material difference in the counts.
And I guess where I'm getting at, and I'll just cut to the chase, is with all due respect to my clients, it is an age-restricted community, and there's more of a sensitive population for COVID. And during October of 2021, I'm wondering if it is your position that that would have been an accurate count at the intersection from Boyd and Weston.
I can't see, again, at 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning, I can't see where that would be dramatically different. And again, at levels of service B, bearing in mind that as I did this sensitivity analysis, look, if there were 20 or 40 more cars leaving Hearthstone, doesn't matter. It's not going to change my findings. Most of the traffic leaving the community turns right. So they have better levels of service just because it's easier to make a right turn than a left turn.
Sure. I wanted to go into the ITE manual. And again, I'm not asking for a full dissertation on how it works, but if you can give a general terms, because I think probably most of the people in the public, and I know I am, are confused as to how the ITE data is generated.
I thought I covered that. I'll be brief. Traffic consultants go out and study. We put machines down. We visually observe. We prepare counts at a site driveway for a variety of land uses. And that data is evaluated and sent to ITE voluntarily. ITE then compiles it in a publication called Trip Generation. The most recent edition is the 11th edition that was published, I think, in 2021. So it is the contemporary design practice, and the ITE publication, and again for reference, the data is appended to our July 22nd, 2022 report. It shows the data points for the studies that were conducted. So it's not guessing, it's literally going out and counting the ins and outs for a given size warehouse.
Is it geographically based, meaning, are we talking about data from Arizona and New Jersey and Colorado, or is it more limited than that?
No, it is compiled throughout the United States. A few select sites in Canada slip in, but by and large, it is a national database, which is why, as I mentioned more recently, we've compared that with actual counts in New Jersey and found the ITE data to be higher.
Do you understand what the term professional judgment means?
I do.
And is that required as part of either an ITE analysis? Do they require that, or is just your profession? Do you require to use professional judgment when making these sort of traffic studies?
We look at the available data. We contrast it with other information we may have independently generated in-house. And as is consistent with engineering practice, judgment by a qualified professional does enter into the practice, but by and large, we stick to the published values and procedures to eliminate any influence of that type of necessary judgment. And for example, in the ITE data, as we looked at the projections, the board may recall I estimated 30 trips and 40 trips at night, 30 in the morning, 30 at night. The ITE data, and again, it's a statistical model. If anyone remembers how data is reduced, we come up with ways to project traffic. Even for a 1,000 square foot building, the ITE data estimates there'd be 24 trips in the morning and 27 at night. So at the small size of building that is proposed, we're dealing with a constant, which is why when we contrast it with the applicant's estimates, IT is higher. So we look at the data, we look at the lows and we look at the highs, and we look at what yields a conservative estimate, which is what our study did. That's probably the greatest extent of engineering judgment, other than deciding how many go east and how many go west, that factor into this analysis.
Thank you. You utilize the ITE 150 classification for this, is that correct?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that that's the ITE 150 warehouse classification is a pretty broad classification when you compare it to something else like a multifamily housing or a shopping center or something like that?
No, I don't agree with that. A warehouse, and I'll read the definition, is primarily devoted to the storage of materials, but it may also include office and maintenance areas. That's what's been proposed.
And it's based off of the size of the building, I believe you said as well, right?
Well, the data is compiled for a spectrum of sizes, and again, I'll read from, this is appended to our February 2023 submittal. The sites surveyed were from the 1980s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010 in California, Connecticut, Minnesota, sorry to go fast, Michael, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Texas. There are also subcategories of high cube warehouses, all of which, per the same square footage, generate less traffic than Land Use Code 150.
Does the ITE have any information or data about the number of truck bays, for example, that would be in a typical ITE 150 warehouse?
Not to my recollection.
Okay. And you mentioned before, I think a few times, and it's in your report as well from February, that the land use approvals run with the land.
Correct.
And that's why you believe ITE, in a way, is almost more accurate than using what the tenant projects, because you don't know who the tenant's going to be.
Well, more accurate, again, ITE recommends that where it's known, traffic projection should be based on the end user. As I indicated, I would be, I think, fairly subject to some criticism if I said, hey, this particular building for this particular tenant shows X numbers, and a board engineer doing, a proper review would say, yeah, but when I look at ITE, it says those numbers would be higher. You should be using that. So we followed that practice, which is why I can say with confidence we have overstated the projected traffic impacts associated with this particular application and the testimony presented to the board.
So we have ITE is one estimate. We have what the proposed tenant has estimated as another. The question I have is, would it be possible to do an analysis, I'll call it a worst case scenario analysis, looking at all of the truck bays and all of the truck spots and the 99 parking spots, and to see, if this was at full build out with a different tenant, how would that look in the traffic projection?
I did. That was the sensitivity analysis I did, and that is if there was some way that this site could generate 300 and I think it was 60 outbound traffic movements, which is more than triple the amount of parking and triple the number of loading bays. At that particular point, there would be a level of service E leaving the site. So basically, that's the limit of capacity. There's no physical way that this site could ever generate that traffic.
Now,
but yes, we did that analysis.
I apologize. Could you do that for truck trips, specifically, as opposed to, because I'm assuming that was for cars, is that correct?
That was for all traffic. It included a composite of cars and trucks.
Okay. Is that something you could provide to the board and the public if requested, so that we could take a look at it?
That's my testimony. I'll leave it to your consultant to provide that information, but it's not germane to the testimony that's been presented.
Thank you. Does the ITE manual provide, an analysis for recommended parking on sites?
It provides, again, much like trip generation, it provides statistics as to parking demand, yes, for a given land use.
Would you happen to know for a 130 square foot warehouse what the recommended parking spaces would be?
It's not a recommendation. Again, I want to be very clear. What ITE presents is data. It's up to the reviewers to assess what that data means. So I didn't calculate it for 130, I did it for another example, but if I apply the ITE parking generation information for a 130,000 square foot warehouse building, it would be approximately 60 parking spaces. That's the actual demand. That's not what any one site has, that's what is demanded of the use.
Is there a correlation between those numbers and the trip generation numbers?
No.
Okay. And does ITE, similar for parking for vehicles, does it do an analysis of parking for trucks? Is there something like that?
No.
I have some questions about safety. And I guess the general question I'll start with was there any type of traffic safety analysis, I know that's a general term, done on Weston Road or any of the nearby roads?
Not by my office, no.
So not to continue to ask the same question, but so I'm assuming, did you analyze any of the, for example, school bus stops on any of the nearby local roads?
No.
Did you factor in the use of the roads by bicyclists that may be traveling to and from school or work?
Yes, to the extent they were identified in the traffic counts, they were included in the background information.
Did you take into account any pedestrian traffic in any of the nearby roads?
Same answer. To the extent any were visible when we did our traffic counts, they would have been taken into consideration.
When you looked at Weston Road, or any of the nearby roads like Sunny Mead or Falcon, did you ever do an analysis of like the road width and how that would factor in with truck traffic?
Well, when the governing body made this a permitted use, the presumption is that was a consideration when they decided what would be appropriate to be developed. The applicant follows the ordinance in terms of what is permitted setbacks, all of the bulk standards, and essentially follows the blueprint that's been prescribed by zoning. We didn't perform any other analysis external to the site. We looked at the dimensions of the roadway. We looked at the sight lines that are depicted on the plans. We took into consideration the curvature of the road and the need to provide sight distance for safe ingress and egress. But anything external to the site is outside of the scope of what we did for this application.
Okay. Probably same answer, but do you know the width of Weston Road, for example?
Off the top of my head, no. It varies in width. The applicant is proposing to widen it. I don't recall whether Hearthstone made some widening as part of their development, but just looking to see if I included it. No, I don't have a specific measurement in the study.
Would it surprise you that we're talking about 8.5 to 9 feet in width for each lane?
I think it's wider than that, but yeah, a 20-foot width road is likely. Depends on where it's measured.
All right. How about shoulders? Did you look at any of the roadway shoulders throughout Weston Road or any of the other nearby roads?
There are shoulders on some of the roads. They have been provided intermittently where a development application, I'm sure the board has required widening across the site frontage. For example, the industrial building immediately to our east has shoulders. The subject application would provide shoulders. So they are intermittent throughout the corridor.
Did your office speak with any, I don't know if this is common practice, conduct any interviews with local residents to know how they've been impacted by existing truck traffic?
No, that is not something we evaluate. Again, when we're considering a permitted use, the assumption is that has been assumed to be an acceptable consequence of building in accordance with zoning.
Was an analysis done of any, I guess, the turning radius, for lack of a better way of saying it, for nearby intersections?
Not off track. We have done the radius analysis for the site driveways to make sure that trucks can be accommodated, but external to that, no. And again, there are trucks using Weston Road, Sunny Mead Road, Falcon Road. There are a number of other industrial users in the area. So no, we haven't specifically evaluated that.
You gave some testimony somewhat near the end of your presentation about the routes from, I guess, Port Elizabeth to the site, and then from the site to the various FedEx, UPS, and DHL locations.
Correct.
And I believe you said those routes were generated based off of looking at Google Maps.
Well, I've been doing this, I'm embarrassed to admit, close to 40 years, so I've obviously have some experience and knowledge of the roadway system throughout most of the state. And as I look at it from a traffic engineering perspective, I find the Google Maps to be a valuable tool, but not entirely accurate or dispositive. But again, tempered with the time of day, for example, for arrivals from the port, I think my estimates are reasonable.
But other than projecting where the traffic may go, did you do any other analysis of any of those roads? Like if trucks go up north on 206 towards the circle, did you look at intersections there to see how turning radii would work, or, you know, how it would impact any of that traffic that's already difficult?
Well, if there were 0 trucks on any of the roads today, then that may be something I would consider to do. Given the fact that this site is immediately adjacent to another industrial use, that there are at least 1, if not 2, trucking facilities further south on Sunnymead Road, that there are industrial uses on Champlain Road and throughout the township, it gets far afield from my responsibility to start to evaluate every intersection in a community to accommodate traffic that's already using those roads and intersections.
What is the immediate adjacent use that you were mentioning, if you know?
There's a small industrial use immediately to our east.
Do you know the size of that building?
No, I do not.
How about how many truck bays there are?
I do not.
Similar with some of the other local uses you just referenced, do you know either size or truck bays?
No.
Okay. You mentioned this before, and I was just a little confused. And again, I'm not trying to make you redo your testimony to trip you up or anything, but what were the protections to ensure that all parking, whether it be truck parking or car parking, that's associated with the warehouse happens on site? And it's a big concern of my client that either the roadway, Weston Way or Weston Road, or Hearthstone isn't going to be utilized for parking.
Sure. Well, many of your questions have questioned the parking supply and the number of loading spaces that have been proposed. And again, not to be flippant, but that's the very reason why the applicant has proposed what they have, is to ensure that that scenario of trespass, if you will, in less desirable areas doesn't occur. We have an abundant parking supply that meets the needs of the use. Is it oversupplied? If we look at ITE data, maybe we are over slightly, but it does account for a shift change, right? As shift 1 ends and shift 2 employees arrive, we do have that simultaneous occurrence. We want to make sure that all of that parking can occur on site. Same with truck loading bays. We never want to have that circumstance where it spills out onto the public street or adjoining property. So I'd say we could add more, but that dovetails into a whole different concern. So that's precisely the reason why, and you'll hear from our logistics expert, why there are a certain number of parking spaces and loading docks.
Are there going to be any, if this is approved, would there be any protections to ensure that no trucks turn into the Hearthstone community?
First off, I can't see why they would. Other than, and again, this is where posting signs that say no trucks is problematic, because trucks need to come into Hearthstone when residents move in and out. So it can be private gated community. Your client can certainly post whatever signage they feel is necessary to convey that message to the motoring public, but I can't conceive of a reason why a trucker destined to this site, particularly with GPS and routing information, why they would ever errantly wind up in an age-restricted community.
I know it's happened before, which is part of the concern.
I don't have any information to support that, but I'll leave that representation to your experts.
Thank you.
But your client can control their own means of ingress and egress to the community. We work with a number of age-restricted communities. Gated access is not uncommon, so there are techniques to guard against that concern.
Are you aware of the New Jersey State Planning Commission Office of Planning Advocacy's distribution warehouse and goods movement guidelines?
I'm vaguely familiar with that recommended practice. I think it was issued last year.
Yeah, September 7th of 2022. So vaguely familiar. I'm assuming you didn't utilize this as part of your analysis for the traffic in this site?
No, this application was submitted well before that, so and again, as a permitted use, I defer to the host community in terms of what they've established as appropriate zoning.
Did you do it, I believe you said you already did, but I'm just going to ask again. Did you do it an on-site traffic circulation analysis?
I reviewed the plans that Mr. Ford's office prepared, so I laid down templates and looked at overall circulation, but I didn't design it. I just looked at it for consistency with standard traffic engineering practice.
Okay. So Mr. Ford's not here, and I don't know if there's a way to get one of the site plans, one of the sheets up, but I did have a specific question, and I don't think it's the one you're looking at now, but it was sheet 19.
Yeah, I don't even know what sheet that is.
Okay. But you said you did review it, and you believe that it meets the circulation requirements.
Well, for reference, what is sheet 19?
There's a turning radius analysis. I don't know if that's the right term. And some of the angles.
Is there a specific question? And I'll do my best if there's an area on the site or a particular question you have.
There's a location near the loading bays. I believe it's I think it's the east, but I'm hoping it's not the west. It's when you.
Yes, the loading is all on the east side or proposed on the easterly side of the building.
And in the top of the eastern top, there's a depiction of a truck and its circulation. And I don't understand how it would work, because if you see the depiction, there's a tractor trail that appears to be going over a handful of the spots to be able to make that turn. Do you see where I'm looking at?
Well, it's a split exhibit. So on the left-hand side is a truck circulation path for trucks, and the right-hand side of the exhibit is a truck template for fire apparatus.
Do you mind if I walk over there so I can just tell you what I'm looking at? So on the left side figure of that analysis, or on that sheet, I mean, there looks like there's a truck, and the way the circulation has it going is that it cuts across those parking spaces. And I'm just wondering your opinion as to how that would work out.
Sure. It cuts in front of those spaces, not across them. And just from my review of the plan, the path of what would be the cab, not the trailer, as it swings to make, anyone who's backed up a trailer knows, you turn the opposite way and your front end swings out a little wider. It gets right up to those spaces, but in my opinion, it doesn't come directly up to them. In the alternative, the truck can pull a little bit further to the west, so you're not looking at the plan. In the southeast corner of the site is a proposed refuse enclosure. The truck could pull 5 feet west of that trash enclosure, still make the turn successfully, and provide a little greater buffer to any trucks or trailers that happen to be stored in those 6 or 7 spaces, 9 spaces.
So it's your testimony that if those spaces in the east, or I'll call it top left corner, if there are trucks in those spaces, that a truck could actually get out of one of those bays?
Well, it is a 60-foot bay, and that allows a trailer to be stored in that bay without its cab. The largest trailer permitted on the road in New Jersey is 53 feet. So there's a 7-foot buffer where the stripe extends further west than it needs to. And I would also assume that trailer probably, the tailgate hangs over the curb. So I would say there's going to be anywhere from 7 to 10 feet of space beyond what you're seeing in that exhibit where that truck could easily make the turn. So I don't find that to be problematic.
If a truck did get stuck in that area, how would the circulation work?
Well, when you say get stuck.
Get stuck in that top left corner, meaning like if there was a maneuver that went wrong, for lack of a better term, and it's either not able to make clearance or not able to get back into the bay. I mean, is there another way around for other trucks?
Any trucks that, if that individual happens to be in the way, the site provides 130 feet between the easterly face of the building and the curb, or those parking spaces. In my experience, the standard dimension is 110 to 120 feet. So there's already been built in a few extra feet, and then we have an extra 10 feet in those spaces. If another truck, and by your scenario, if it happened to be disabled, other trucks could turn around prior to the site, back into one of the mid-facade loading bays, pull forward, and then back into one of the other interior ones at the southern end. Some warehouses use what's called a yard mule, which is not a full tractor cab, but it is an open-air piloted, stubby, sometimes they're called a bobtail. Those are often used to move trailers in much larger sites without a cab on it. So there are a lot of ways that trailer could be brought into the site, but that's a fairly extreme hypothetical. But we're not designing for trucks to break down in the middle of the parking lot.
No, of course. I'm sure you're not. Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
In your February 28th report in comment 1, you mentioned that the applicant, that the building's too small, and it doesn't have that double-sided truck access that you mentioned earlier that's needed for a parcel hub facility.
Correct.
And you stated that the applicant would stipulate that the parcel warehouse would not be developed. Are you able to confirm that stipulation?
Well, the design doesn't permit it. I'm not the applicant, so I'll leave that to Mr. Ogrodnik for that representation at some future point.
Fair. Was there any analysis done as to emergency access into Hearthstone when fire trucks or ambulances go there, and how the new, I guess, intersection, for lack of a better term, would affect that if ambulances or fire trucks needed to get into Hearthstone?
I'm not sure what the question is. We've proposed a driveway that is located maybe 200 feet to the west of Hearthstone's entrance. In the event of an emergency circumstance, all vehicles yield to emergency vehicles. So whether there's a driveway to an office building or a warehouse, those vehicles would be, their right-of-way is subordinate to that of emergency traffic. So that response time to Hearthstone would be unaffected by the development of this site.
And you believe would be unaffected even with a narrow road and large tractor trailers being on the Weston Road?
Well, there are tractor trailers using Weston Road today, and I'll assume your client hasn't experienced any problem associated with the current activity. I think from my testimony and what you've heard from the applicant, one truck every half an hour or so in the peak hour is not going to affect that condition or that response time.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's a fair assumption that they haven't affected that or felt an impact already, but we'll get into that later. I have no further questions. Thank you.
You're going to wait? So I will, open the public. You made a motion?
Motion to open to public.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, is there anyone from the public that would wish to question the testimony of the traffic expert please come to the mic, state your name and address for the record, and again, question strictly on his testimony.
Hi, Meryl Bisberg, 4 Hickory Hill Road. You mentioned before that if there were bikes or pedestrians visible when you... I'm sorry. If there were bikes or pedestrians visible when you did the traffic counts, and they would be included?
Correct.
Okay. Were there bikes or pedestrians?
I don't have that. I'd have to look at the raw count data to see exactly what we observed. Our staff does observe everything that moves on a given roadway, so...
Well, maybe I should ask it another way. There could certainly be a possibility of bikes or pedestrians visible that are in that traffic. I do understand that there are some bikes that use that for commuting from further north off
Sure.
Champlain Road.
We observed one bike, one traveling eastbound and one traveling westbound on Weston Road. We observed no pedestrians.
Okay, so there's a law in New Jersey about 4-foot clearance?
Correct.
For bicycles. Do you feel that the trucks will be able to do that in those cases on those narrow roads?
Sure. Well, they're doing it today. And again, this is a road that already carries truck traffic. There are 32 trucks using Weston Road in 1 hour in the morning. So whatever's occurring and whatever condition we didn't create, this applicant didn't create, and it exists with or without this application. So that law is designed to protect those individuals, and those trucks would need to yield accordingly.
Okay, I guess we don't know how well that's working now, and I know that's not your job, but I'm just saying to base it only on the traffic counts when we know it actually happens is a concern with the clearance that's required now since I think May of last year. That's state law. Okay. Have any real-life turning radius tests been done with actual tractor trailers? The situation I'm thinking of specifically is if there's a tractor coming in and coming out at the same time from that driveway. Does one of them have to wait?
In reviewing the templates prepared by the engineer, he's provided exceptionally large radii to accommodate those trucks so that, for example, a truck traveling eastbound on Weston Road can make a turn and come into the property, even if there's a vehicle exiting at the same time. So that design was chosen to ensure that one truck doesn't need to yield to another. Again, I can't foresee that occurring, but we're dealing with a lot of what ifs and hypotheticals, so that additional measure has been incorporated into the design.
And a truck coming out making a left could also do that if a truck were going in?
Yes. Well, if a truck is coming in, that truck making a left can't see around the truck coming in, so he needs to wait and yield until he has a clear line of sight before it's safe to proceed and make the left-hand turn. So there is a queuing, but it's occurring all within the site driveway.
Okay. I don't live in that neighborhood, but I do travel through there a lot, and I know that Falcon, Sunnymead, and Weston are all very narrow roads. I was wondering if you did your traffic studies before or after the light was built on Falcon, Sunnymead, because those lights do back up now.
Sure. We did our counts when the board engineer requested we do so after the light was installed.
Okay.
And we know it backs up. That is a consequence of putting in a light, and it was something that was deliberated for many hearings with this board for the, I forget its name now, but the Gateway at Sunnymead project, and it was something that was desired in this portion of the township to help move traffic in a safer manner at that intersection. But yes, it backs up because that's what happens at lights.
Yeah. Has the turning radius been tested? I know you're mentioning that about half the traffic could go between Sunnymead and Falcon. Oh, by the way, Sunnymead starts at 8:30 a.m. p.m. Kindergarten starts at 12:17. Delayed opening, 10:30 a.m., kindergarten, 1:17 p.m. for delayed opening. These are really easy things to find. I looked that up while I was sitting there. So we could similarly do the closings if we wanted to. So if, for instance, Sunnymead was not the road of choice because of the school there, even in the middle of the day, just having a school there, and Falcon was preferred for going out west instead of east, has any turning radius study been done between Falcon and Sunnymead? Because that is a place that people have trouble turning just in their cars.
Sure. I have not done that. That was not part of the installation of the traffic signal. And again, for the time being, there is no restriction for trucks to use Sunnymead Road. So if the governing body were to implement that restriction, again, it affects all of the truck traffic that's using Weston Road today, absent this application. So it's a net that scoops up a lot of fish if that kind of restriction were to be implemented.
Okay.
And that would be something for the governing body to consider, and what the impacts of such a restriction involve.
Okay. I think they brought it up themselves also, so. Okay, I've heard 3 times now use runs with land, and I want to understand that better when we're talking about traffic, not when we're talking about the land the warehouse is on, because the whole issue with warehouses is the kinetics. So what does that mean when you're talking about traffic?
Sure. When zoning is established, it's a blueprint for the development of land in a community. And this applicant is following that blueprint. That's what zoning does. It gives a property owner guidance as to how they can use their property. This application fulfills that blueprint. Once this board makes a decision, and we'll hope it's favorable, that is an approval for the use of that building on that land that continues. And it eclipses or exceeds any given owner or user of the building. The building could be sold, and the next individual might like that warehouse, and he may buy the building. So even though the testimony has been there are 10 inbound trucks and up to 10 outbound trucks and a limited number of employees, our study has assumed a traditional warehouse use to guard against all of those what-ifs, because once it's built, it's there, and it can continue to be used for that same operation.
So you're saying it's incumbent upon the approving body to ensure that the roads are also going to be appropriate for that use, for that warehouse? Because the traffic has almost nothing to do with what's going on in the warehouse.
Sure. Well, I've just spent an hour and a half, and I disagree.
I mean, I understand, but I mean physically, it's fanning out from the warehouse, and the issue we have with a lot of the warehouses in Hillsborough is these roads are narrow, and the entrances and exits are narrow, and they're building on land that hasn't been used as a warehouse before, even this one, and how do we make sure that the roads are going to work and we're not going to have a safety problem? I think that's really the issue here.
Sure, that's what this process involves. But when the use was determined to be permitted, that blueprint was drawn. And this applicant, has the right to rely on that blueprint when proposing a land development application. So that work is part of the periodic zoning review that any community does. And if there are roads that are too narrow, well, those maybe shouldn't be industrial type uses or shopping center uses or any other use. That's part of the overall planning process. We're the reaction to that process. So we're just fulfilling that blueprint.
Okay. I'm glad you said it. Just one more question. You mentioned that the empty, well, I guess this is a question for the board just really quickly. Are tractor-trailer parking spaces identified in light industrial specifically? I know they're not in TCD, but I don't know about light industrial. Tractor-trailer parking versus car parking.
That's a different question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. So I'm asking that because the question for you is, you said that the empty tractor trailers might be picked up directly from the parking lot.
From the truck parking spaces,
Right.
not the
Truck-
parking lot.
I'm
I want to
sorry,
be
I mean
clear.
the truck parking.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so there is room in the truck parking lot to maneuver, to pluck these containers from the truck parking lot? That's been figured into the engineering?
Absolutely. We're not designing a site so that it can't be used by the end user. We want to make sure trucks can get in and out. That's why, Mr. Ford spent a lot of time with his staff, and we look at truck templates and the like. It's vetted by the end user, obviously, to make sure operationally it works for them. But, yeah, we're not designing a site to not work.
So do we know what percentage of the cases an empty container might be picked up from the building versus from the truck parking?
I do not. I mean, empty ones, generally speaking, would be within the parking areas. Ones that are being unloaded or being loaded would be at the docks.
Okay, so we wouldn't be loading one of these UPS containers at the parking lot. We'd only be loading that from the docks?
Only from the docks. That was covered in prior hearing. There will be no activity, loading or unloading outside of the building.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to sit down because I got a few notes. It's Mr. Dolan, is that correct?
I think you need to be identified first, but it's Mr. Dean.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dean. David Brook, 7 Winding Way. Mr. Dean, I'm not a traffic engineer. You are. So bear with me a little bit because I'm hearing this study similar to, I think, of a house built on an island. You build the house, you design the house, you can get into the house, but it sounds like everything you're talking about has nothing to do with the surrounding territory. Is that correct?
I don't understand your question. Is there something about my testimony you have a question about?
That's what I'm asking you. It sounds like your testimony indicates that you have done studies of just this facility with nothing else around it, meaning that your facility will work and the trucks can get in, but my question to you is, have you done anything to look at how the trucks actually get there?
Yes, that's what my testimony, not only trucks, but employee traffic, which is why we studied, obviously right at our front door, we've studied Sunnymead in Weston, and we've studied Sunnymead in Falcon.
Okay, so have you coordinated with the applicant on how it will operate and how many truck trips it will take, or did you base this all on the ITE data?
You've heard the testimony, I assume you've heard the testimony from the applicant. So to me, it's less traffic than I assumed in my study. So my study is conservative. It overstates the projected traffic impacts. It overstates the projected truck impacts. So it hasn't been done in an island. It's considered for the development of a 130+ thousand square foot warehouse building.
But that didn't answer the question. I'm sorry. You did the study based upon more. Your ITE came up with more than what the applicant said. That's correct. Okay. Have you ever gone to an operating 130,000 square foot operating facility with 20 docks to see if your ITE data is accurate?
I haven't done it for a 130,000 square foot building with 20 docks. What I've indicated is our office, as well as other consultants, have gone to 500,000 square foot warehouses and 600,000 square foot warehouses and 206,000 square foot warehouses, and in all cases, they generate less traffic than ITE. So, and those are sites in New Jersey. So it's inherently conservative given the nature of this process. We tend to err on the side of overstating traffic impacts for a thorough vetting that the system will work without having negative traffic impacts.
So the answer to your question is no.
I clearly said that. I have not studied a 130,000 square foot warehouse with 20 docks.
Okay. Did you ever go to this site where this is being proposed to be built to watch traffic and look at trucks yourself?
Well, there are no trucks, there is no site development.
You're correct. My apologies. Did you ever go to Weston Road where the site is being proposed and look at traffic and watch trucks there?
Yes.
Okay. And did you see 53-foot tractor trailers on the road there?
Yes.
And do you recall which direction they were going in?
Both.
Both directions. Okay. Good. And in your time there, did you have an opportunity to go to the curve on Weston Road just before the Sunny Mead traffic light?
Yes.
Okay. And were any of the tractor trailers making those turns there when you were there?
Yes.
Okay. And were they doing these things very quickly or very slowly?
I don't have an opinion on that. I observed trucks. I didn't measure their speed. They were traveling for the prevailing roadway conditions.
And how about at the traffic light? Were you able to see any 53-foot trucks making the turn at Sunny Mead and Falcon at the traffic light?
Yes.
And were they able to stay in their lanes?
Sometimes they drive over the curb.
Okay. And were you able to see any tractor trailers going from Weston onto Sunny Mead towards the school?
That I don't recall. I'd have to look at the counts. That's why when, we send staff out there for 2.5 hours and we monitor the traffic, I'd have to look up to see what that frequency was.
Okay. You mentioned that roughly 50% of the traffic would go towards 206 and 48%, 50% would go towards Kennedy Boulevard into Manville. Was that correct?
Correct.
Were you able to see if any 53-foot tractor trailers were able to make the turn when they got down to either Main Street or River Road to go onto the railroad tracks?
In Manville?
In Manville?
No.
Okay. Did any of your traffic studies calculate flooding into the routes that these trucks would be taking?
No, I do traffic studies. I don't look at flooding.
Okay, well, if they can't drive, thank you. You mentioned the issue of Hillsborough roads and no restrictions on the roads. Were you able to check in Manville with regards to any restrictions into Manville for these 53-foot tractor trailers?
No.
Okay. Going back to your testimony, you mentioned with regards to the FedEx, which would be either Branchburg or Talmadge Road in Edison. So I'm assuming those would go either to 206 or into Manville towards Edison. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And the same is true with DHL, excuse me, if they are going to Avenel, Elizabeth, or Carteret, I'm presuming the shortest route for them is to go towards 287 through Manville.
Correct.
Other than the traffic counts that were done on Weston Road, is everything else in your study based upon ITE data and statistical information?
No.
Can you tell me what wasn't done that wasn't ITE data besides the traffic counts?
Sure. As indicated, we visited the site. We looked at the roadway conditions, lighting, the speed limit. Traffic counts were conducted by our staff. That's not ITE. And then lastly, we used procedures published by the Transportation Research Board for calculating levels of service pursuant to the procedures outlined in the Highway Capacity Manual. So ITE is but one small component of this comprehensive traffic analysis.
Okay. You mentioned speeds. Did you do speed calculations on the roads?
We did not.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Brian Tarantino, Fairfield Lane. So you testified that you observed 32 trucks in the morning and 18 trucks in the evening. Were they all 18-wheel tractor trailer, 53-foot trucks?
They were not.
How many of them were tractor trailers?
I don't have that right in front of me, but I did anticipate this question, so I'll have to spend some time to find that while you continue.
When you look at, when you assess the traffic, did you consider other approved developments, even though they haven't been built yet, when you assess the impact of traffic?
If they're near the site and would have an impact, yes. I don't recall there being any, so we didn't take anything into consideration.
So the development for the Roycebrook Country Golf Course, whatever that's, M&M or whatever that's called, you didn't consider that?
No.
Okay. Do you think that would be appropriate since it's like a mile away?
I don't know anything about that project. I don't know when it was submitted relative to this application. I don't have an opinion on that. I don't know what it is.
Generally speaking, though, if there was a proposed development, large residential development proposed, would that be relevant in a traffic study for this warehouse?
It depends on where that traffic, how it arrives and departs that site. I don't know anything about the project, so I don't have an opinion on it. I do know that with the favorable conditions that we proposed and the amount of traffic from that general area, I don't know how much of their traffic would wind up on Weston Road that would in any way alter my conclusions.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily end up on Weston Road. It might, but it could end up on Falcon, and it could end up on Sunnymead. So those traffic from your site and the traffic from that proposed development would collide there and would change your estimate of impact. So do you think that would be appropriate to look at that kind of development?
I'll stick with, because our study, one, overstates the amount of traffic associated with the project, and the fact, I couple that with exceptional levels of service in the area at B's and A's. If a few dozen cars from that community were to wind up in this area, it would no way alter my conclusions.
So a few dozen would be okay, but is there an upper limit? Is there another number that would warrant a reanalysis?
If it got to be 100 vehicles an hour on Weston Road, that would get my attention. I don't think it would change my findings, but I would want to look at that.
And we should just go based on your opinion, or would it make sense for there to be an actual study?
Well, part of the planning board's process is to look at these collective and aggregated traffic impacts throughout the community. And I'm not deferring it to the board. This is the first time I'm hearing of it, and we've had 3 engineering reviews from the board engineer. So it's not been on anyone's radar except yours. So I just can't opine as to the scope of that.
Interesting. Okay. Let's go back to Mr. Arif's testimony last week. So he said 4 to 10 trucks coming in per day and 6 to 10 trucks going out. However, in asking him about that, he said the trucks going in would be dropped. Okay, so the cab would leave.
He didn't say that. I'm going to interrupt you here.
Yes, he did, in fact.
He specifically said they would take an empty trailer.
He did. He specifically said they would not take an empty trailer because it's not the same. What he said was it's not the same company.
We'll agree to disagree.
It's a different company that delivers the trucks from the port than it is that would be delivering the trucks to FedEx or wherever the full trucks would be going. So he made it clear that those would be an additional trip, 2 additional trips, a cab going out and a cab coming back to pick up the empty trucks.
Do you have a question for Mr. Dean?
Yes. So I was trying to get to a count here. So for 10 trucks coming in, assuming that a cab would then leave, and then when that truck is empty, would have to come back and then leave with the empty truck, wouldn't that account for 40 trips for the 10 incoming trucks?
Yeah, I don't agree with that estimation, and in my opinion, it's contrary to the testimony, so I don't have any further response.
Okay, well, let's assume you're right, that the...
Objection. It's speculative.
I don't think it's speculative. I'm trying to come up with an estimate of the total number of trips that were based on Mr. Arif's testimony. So that's what I'm doing. There's nothing speculative about it. It's actually based on his testimony. And I was told last week that I had to wait till this week to follow this line of questioning. So,
Well, I would ask the traffic engineer, what was the truck, to restate the truck traffic that your study was based on?
Sure. Again, my analysis was based on ITE data, which, as I've indicated, is double what the applicant projected. And we estimated 1 truck entering in the morning peak hour, 2 leaving, and in the evening, 2 entering and 2 leaving. My expectation is that those would be fully loaded trucks with trailers. If they happen to be only a cab unit, that's not a 70-foot vehicle. It's a cab unit. So it's functionally, its characteristics are very different. But either way, my estimate and assumption was these are fully loaded trucks. Or should I say, let me rephrase, tractor-trailer combination units.
So last week, Mr. Arif testified that the full trucks coming in would be basically shipping containers from international port, would be unloaded, would take a day to unload or 2 days to unload. A cab would come back to pick that truck up, and it would leave empty. I asked, would you use the same truck that's empty now to fill it with outgoing material? He said no. So each 10 trucks going in would at least generate 20 trips. Do you agree with that?
I don't, and I recall the testimony very specifically. The truck coming in with a fully loaded container would attach itself to an empty container parked on the lot and go back to the port.
Right. So 10 full trucks going in would then have to leave empty, right? Because they're not getting loaded. So there would be 10 full trucks going in and 10 coming out. So that's 20.
Correct.
And then
that's 10, hold on, it's 10 trips. Excuse me, 20 trips. It's 10 trucks.
Yeah, 20 trips.
Right.
And then the trips are what we care about. And then then for the outbound, it would be 10 empty trucks going in and 10 full trucks going out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about if his estimate is not actually higher, it doesn't end up being higher because he talks about 100% growth in 2023, if it in fact represents his business activity 2 years from now, at a minimum, assuming the cabs don't leave and could pick up other trucks to leave, assuming that, at a minimum, the site would generate 40 truck trips a day. Is that not the case?
I'm going to object as to the form of the question as it's mischaracterizing the testimony of Mr. Arif.
I don't know how you can get to say that. Is that not right?
That's incorrect. That's incorrect.
So help me understand. What do you think the number of truck trips a day would be based on his testimony?
The testimony was 4 to 10 trucks inbound and 6 to 10 trucks outbound. Your question was at minimum, wouldn't that be 40? No, 40 is the maximum. The minimum would be 20.
Okay, so the maximum would be 40.
Correct.
Okay, and that's assuming that the cabs don't leave. When we could we'll check the transcript, see what he said, but that assumes that the cabs don't leave by themselves. They actually pick up a full truck and leave.
I'm just looking at the testimony that talks about truck traffic. I can only rely on the Mr. Arif's testimony the same way you can.
Okay, so you've been saying that your ITE estimate is double, more than double, of what Mr. Arif, the usage rate that Mr. Arif testified to, but in fact now we've just figured out that actually it's about the same.
No, it's not.
Okay, you said it was 39. Your
39 trucks yield 78 trips.
You said, oh, good. So you're saying it's 78 truck trips a day.
Correct.
That's the usage rate.
That was the ITE. I looked it up. That was my testimony.
Okay, 78. Okay. Sorry, I didn't understand that. So you're at 78 then.
Double the applicant's estimate. Yes.
Okay. When you that's good. And let me ask you about the ITE estimate. So you say that it's based on these counts. Now, are the counts averages or maximums?
They're neither. They're counts. You put a machine across a driveway, and it says in 1 hour there were 52 cars. That data goes to ITE. Another consultant puts a person out of the driveway, and he says there were 25 cars. That goes to ITE. It's data. That's all it is. It's counts of existing facilities.
Okay, and is it possible that there might be a peak time or peak season that didn't get caught by those counts?
I have no idea. The data is submitted for a variety of uses for typical day-to-day regular activity as consultants. We don't collect counts, on a holiday. We wouldn't get a driveway count on, 4th of July. It wouldn't be valuable data.
So if you wanted to understand maximum rates, you would need to study across multiple days. Is that correct?
Well, that's why the IT data is compiled for a number of different sites. Yeah, so you get that spectrum of highs and lows. Some users, as I've indicated, 600,000 square foot warehouse in Carteret does 30 cars an hour.
Right.
That's on the low end of the spectrum.
So I'm looking at your report. Sorry, I don't. The one that you have there. Sorry, I'm looking at the page. You have a page number here. Doesn't seem to be a page number, but it looks like it's like page 33. It shows warehousing and it's type 150, and it's really like this. Yeah, but go to the truck one. So, yours. Yours is not in black and white. Okay. So you drew a line from 158 up to this dotted line, and then you measure 3 as the peak truck trip rate. Isn't that right?
Correct.
So would that represent an average of these numbers? I mean, I know there's quite a lot of numbers here, and there's a regression line that's. It's not really a regression line because there's not enough, it's not a statistically correct regression line, but essentially is it an average rate?
I don't think it's an average rate. As we look in each little X, and I'm sorry for the board members that aren't following this testimony, there's a graph, and it's the data that's been compiled by ITE. Each X represents a sample. At the time, and at one point, we must have been looking at a much larger building. The building is not 158,000 square feet, it's 130. But each one of those little X's represents an actual count of trucks for a given building size. Every single site under 150, probably 200,000 square feet, generates 3 to 4 trucks per hour, except for one site. There was one site that looks to be I don't even know what size it is. It might be 10,000 square feet that generated 7 to 8 trucks, 15 total trips. It's an outlier. All of the other data points of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different studies all show 5 or fewer, 3 or fewer trucks. And I should say, just for accuracy, that comports with the applicant's representation and his estimates of the truck activity. So I think it's accurate, and it certainly buttresses not only my projections, but is consistent with the applicant's
of an average
information. Not an average of the trucks, the number of trucks that come in and out. On one day, might it be 4? It might be, instead of 3.
So my question...
Just put a warning, we got 2 minutes.
Dang, okay.
10 o'clock is...
My question is, does the graph that we're looking at and the extrapolation to get 3 out of 158 in this particular report, does that represent an average of these values, or are we looking at a maximum? Is it an average truck generation rate for that peak time, or is it an average?
I can't answer that question. It's again, of the sites that were studied, it can't be an average because out of 7 different research sites, all of them are 3 to 4 truck trips. There's one outlier at 15.
Actually, there's X's along the bottom at 0. So this study includes warehouses that are at, I can't tell, the axis
0.
is very small.
Correct.
That are
They'd be 0 truck trips.
Correct. So the 3 represents basically an average, a little bit more sophisticated, sort of like a weighted average, but essentially an average of the truck trips, averaging those zeros plus those few that are here, plus a few that are really high, like you pointed out, 15 for something that's like 10,000 square feet, and maybe 11 for something that's close to 158, and others that are way, way much higher, right? Wouldn't you agree?
The data shows that, yes, as the building gets bigger, there are more truck bays and obviously more truck trips.
That wasn't my question.
I don't agree that it's an average. So if you have another question in the 30 seconds remaining.
It does consider that there are it did consider and factor in this number warehouses that generate 0 truck trips per day. Is that right?
I don't know that to be the case.
Well, it's right there on the chart.
No.
X's are on the chart.
I understand that. I don't know whether it's an average. I'd need to add up each data point.
I moved on to another question. My question was, does this number that you extrapolated take into consideration warehouses that generate 0 truck trips?
I just presented the data. That's the ITE data. Did some of them generate 0 truck trips? Yes.
And that was part of the factor that you used?
Not that I used. I'm replicating the ITE data.
Yeah, and you used that factor.
Correct. I presented that in my report. And I showed my calculations to the teacher. I said, here are the 3 trips.
Okay.
Okay. We're just past 10 now.
Okay.
So
great. I do have more questions, but
I know you do.
Yeah.
You got that iPad there.
I appreciate
that template. So.
I appreciate the time.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're at the witching hour. I want to follow up on a question that Mr. Torriello asked, that Mr. Dean indicated he was going to get the answer, but I don't think he got the answer. And that was how many tractor trailers were found when you did the studies in 21 and 22 that actually were in that count that you came up with?
I will have that answer at the next hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Dean.
I've not forgotten.
I just wondered if you had it, Gary.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay.
I'll hold mine, too.
It's out of time. You can't add. Yeah, you got to wait till next time, too. Okay. So, Mr. Coyce, do we have this applicant schedule on a different second?
June 1st.
June 1st.
June 1st.
June 1st.
Okay. Do we need to do a motion to carry?
We need a motion, Mr. Chairman, to carry this application without further notice to June 1, 2023 at 7 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter may be heard. Without further notice, I do have one thing I have to say after. So.
Okay.
before everybody
So-
gets up to leave.
So may I have a motion to carry this applicant to June 1st of this year at 7 PM without further notice?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Scopo?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Committeeman Chigarelli?
Yes.
Gavani?
Yes.
Chair Sarachi?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, if you recall, there was a discussion last week on the issue of the infamous donut hole property and the impact that has on this application. I would indicate the board, and I believe counsel for the applicant and the objectors, are in receipt of my office's opinion, which came out this afternoon, which I believe, correct me, Mr. Coyce, will probably be up on Civic Clerk tomorrow.
Correct.
Which indicates that it does not impact on the standing issue in terms of this application going forward, but there are issues that need to be addressed by the applicant as to the impact of its application on the land itself, on the property itself.
I just wanted to update, I did speak with our counsel who's handling the quieting of that title, and the court has entered an order setting time, as you know, in tax certificate law, which would require the defendants and heirs July 5th to redeem. Usually then it's about 30 to 60 days before the court enters a final judgment, which can be recorded as a deed.
Or longer, as you and I both know, depending on the court. So if you would
The
provide...
foreclosure unit's the only one that's working, so.
Sometimes, sometimes.
So it'll be, my point is, once title is gained, we believe that the issue to be moot. Perhaps actually, no, it won't affect notice because it's in the middle of the
The
lot.
issue will be somewhat moot, but I'm assuming you anticipate this application be finished before that occurs. So I would request, Mr. Ogrodnik, that if counsel, as to the issue of quiet title, has information from the foreclosure unit that we can all frame, because getting information from the foreclosure unit is always fun, you provide it to my office, to counsel for the objector, and to Mr. Coyce, so he can put it up on Civic Clerk. And until we have a different situation, ladies and gentlemen, it is what it is right now. So, thank you, Mr. Ogrodnik.
Thank you. So, David, do we have anyone on the agenda for May 25th?
Homestead Road, LLC.
Okay.
Which Mr.
So, just
Mr. Ogrodnik gets the week off.
So just to remind everyone, then we do have a meeting on May 25th at 7 PM.
And if there is anyone who has not reviewed prior meetings, I'm assuming that Ms. Paget will advise you accordingly prior to the May 25th meeting.
Okay. So with that, I'll entertain a motion of adjournment.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. See everyone in a couple of weeks.